The morning I didn't lie to my son, I wasn't doing anything heroic. I was just tired, too tired to perform. And in that exhaustion, something true slipped out. That was the bravest thing I did in a decade. And it happened in a minivan, in the rain, with a spilled juice box at my feet. If you've ever had a moment like that, small, unglamorous, quietly devastating, then you're in exactly the right place. Welcome to Breathe and Begin. I'm Sarah, psychologist, single mom, former physicist, and a woman who spent most of her life confusing bravery with endurance. If this is your first time here, I'm genuinely glad you found me. If you've been here before, thank you for coming back. These conversations mean everything to me. Before we dive in, if anything today lands for you, leave me a comment.
I read them, not because the algorithm needs it, though it does, but because sometimes the most honest thing you'll write all week is in that little box at the bottom of a YouTube video. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. This community is built on exactly the kind of quiet courage we're going to talk about today. Now, let me tell you about bravery. Not the kind that looks good on paper, not the kind that makes a good story at a dinner party, the kind that happens in ordinary moments, in ordinary clothes, with no one watching and nothing to prove. Because here's what I've learned. After years of sitting across from people who've been through genuinely hard things, the bravest thing usually isn't the biggest thing. It's the smallest. When I was 7 years old, my father told me about supernovas. A star, he said, burns and burns and burns. And then, when it can't burn anymore, it explodes. And that explosion, he said, is one of the most violent events in the known universe. Beautiful, catastrophic, visible across galaxies. I thought that was what courage looked like. Visible, catastrophic, big. And for a long time, most of my life, honestly, I operated on that assumption. Bravery was leaving Ohio for MIT. Bravery was surviving the unimaginable. Bravery was fighting a brutal divorce and winning. Those were the stories I told myself, the supernovas. But here's the problem with supernova bravery. It only counts the explosions. It doesn't count the 1,000 quiet mornings before the explosion, when the star just kept burning, steadily, without applause, without anyone looking up. Psychologists have a term, and I'll translate it because I refuse to be the therapist who hides behind jargon, called micro-courage. It's the small, repeated acts of emotional honesty that most of us perform without ever giving ourselves credit for. Texting a friend when you're struggling, saying, "I don't know," in a meeting, closing the laptop before midnight, going to bed instead of opening the wine. None of it looks like a supernova. All of it matters more than we think. There's a lie I learned before I was old enough to know it was a lie. My mother got sick when I was 12, and our house, which had always smelled like bread and laughter, got quieter, sharper. The smell became rubbing alcohol. The laughter became rationed. And somewhere in that shift, I learned strength means needing nothing. I became the kid who cooked dinner and didn't cry at school, the teenager who wrote MIT essays without mentioning fear, the woman who planned a funeral with terrifying efficiency because falling apart was not on the to-do list. I was strong. I was also drowning, slowly, quietly, in a way that had no visible explosions until I was sitting on my parents' kitchen floor at 22 with an empty whiskey bottle next to me and my father watching over me from the armchair until sunrise. That's where strength means needing nothing ends up. Not always, but often. And what I see in my office now, over and over, is people who have been running on that same lie for decades. They're holding families together with their bare hands. They're showing up to jobs that are eating them alive. They're smiling at Christmas dinners while quietly falling to pieces inside. And they call that strength. It is not strength. It's armor. And armor is exhausting to wear. And it doesn't actually protect you from anything. It just makes you harder for people to reach. The brave thing, the actually brave thing, is to take a single piece of it off. One piece, one day. I had a client, I'll call her Diane, early 50s, recently retired, came to me because her daughter had gently suggested she talk to someone. First session, she sat across from me with perfect posture and folded hands and said, "I don't know why I'm here. My problems aren't big enough for therapy." I hear some version of that sentence at least twice a month. My problems aren't big enough.
As if there's a grief tribunal somewhere, deciding which pain qualifies for care. As if you have to submit an application and your suffering gets scored and ranked, and only the top tier gets to ask for help. There is no such tribunal. There never was. What Diane eventually told me, once the perfect posture relaxed, was that she hadn't cried in 11 years. She'd been fine. Her husband was alive. Her kids were healthy. Nothing catastrophic had happened. She'd just slowly gone numb, and she was terrified that she'd never feel anything again. That's not a small problem. That's a profound loss of self. But because it didn't have a visible cause, no death, no disaster, no supernova, she'd been telling herself it didn't count.
The bravest thing Diane did in our first 6 months wasn't anything dramatic. It was this. One Thursday afternoon, she called her daughter and said, "I'm not doing great." That's it. That's the sentence. She told me afterward it was the hardest thing she'd done in years. I believed her completely. My father carried me to the couch. He didn't yell, he didn't lecture. He just moved me from the kitchen floor to the couch, sat in the armchair, and watched over me until sunrise. And when I woke up, shame thick in my throat, his eyes red-rimmed, I looked at him and I said, "Dad, I need help." 3 words. I've given keynotes, I've defended research, I've testified in a custody hearing while a lawyer tried to dismantle me sentence by sentence. None of it took the courage that those 3 words took. Because those 3 words required me to put down the armor I'd been wearing since I was 12 years old. They required me to stop being the strong one. They required me to be, for the first time in a very long time, just a person who needed something. The research on help-seeking is pretty unambiguous on this. It is one of the most protective behaviors a human being can engage in. People who reach out when they're struggling have better mental health outcomes, lower rates of depression, longer lives. We are wired for interdependence, not independence. And yet, we treat asking for help like a failure. We praise the person who handled it on their own. We talk admiringly about people who never complained. We have an entire cultural mythology built around the stoic individual who needs no one. And that mythology is killing people. Slowly. Quietly. So if there's a version of those 3 words sitting in your chest right now, I need help, or I'm not okay, or I don't know what to do, I want you to know, saying that is not weakness. That is the bravest, most honest thing you can do. I've talked about that Tuesday morning before, the minivan, the spilled milk, Ethan in the back seat. But what I haven't said, what I don't talk about enough, is what made that moment so hard. It wasn't the question, "Mom, are you happy?" It was that my instinct was to lie, immediately, reflexively, without even thinking about it. Because lying and saying, "Of course, sweetheart," would have been easy. It would have kept everything smooth. It would have been the performance I'd been giving for years.
And then something stopped me. I don't know if it was exhaustion or grace, or just the particular quality of how my 7-year-old was looking at me in that rearview mirror, not asking to be reassured, genuinely asking. But the lie caught in my throat. And I pulled over, and I put my forehead on the steering wheel, and I let it be true. The bravest thing in that moment wasn't anything I said or did in a big way. It was choosing not to perform for 30 seconds. It was letting one moment be real instead of managed. That's it. And from that moment, that single, unimpressive, traffic-stopping moment, everything in my life started to slowly change. We have a cultural obsession with the grand exit. Quit the job, leave the relationship, move across the country, burn it down and start over. I'm not above this, by the way.
I did literally drive across the country with 2 kids and a car full of secondhand furniture, so I'm not throwing stones here. But I want to say something that doesn't get said enough. Sometimes the bravest thing is staying. Staying in the hard conversation instead of walking out. Staying in the feeling instead of numbing it. Staying in the relationship with yourself, with your partner, with your work, and deciding to actually deal with the thing instead of running from it. A client of mine, I'll call him Marcus, came to me convinced he needed to quit his career. He'd been a surgeon for 25 years, and he was completely burned out. He was certain the brave move was to walk away. And I asked him, what would happen if you stayed, but honest? If you told someone at work how bad it's gotten? If you took the leave of absence you've been too proud to take? He looked at me like I had suggested something outrageous. He took the leave, he went to see his brother in Costa Rica for 3 weeks. He came back, and he's still a surgeon. He's still tired sometimes. But he said something to me recently that I've been thinking about ever since. He said, I thought bravery meant blowing it all up. Turns out it just meant telling the truth. Here's something I see constantly in my work. People who are waiting for the right time, waiting until things calm down, waiting until they feel ready, waiting for someone to give them permission to rest, permission to set the boundary, permission to feel what they're feeling, permission to want something different for their life. I want to tell you something, and I mean this with every bit of clinical and personal authority I have. The permission isn't coming.
Not from your mother, not from your partner, not from the version of yourself that has it all figured out and never feels guilty and always makes the right call. That person doesn't exist, and even if they did, they can't give you permission. Only you can. One of the frameworks I use in therapy, and it sounds deceptively simple, which is why people initially resist it, is something called acting as if. You act as if you already have permission. You act as if you're already worthy of rest, of care, of honesty. Not because you've earned it, not because someone granted it, but because you decide to. It's not about pretending things are fine. It's about choosing to move before you feel certain, because you will almost never feel certain, and the world will almost never feel ready. And the bravest thing, the thing that actually changes your life, is moving anyway, in small, quiet, unglamorous ways. Let me make this concrete, because I think sometimes these conversations stay too abstract, and then we go home and nothing changes. The bravest thing this week might look like this. It might look like going to bed at 10 instead of scrolling until midnight, even though the scrolling feels safer than your own thoughts. It might look like sending the email you've been drafting for 2 weeks, not the perfect version, the honest version. It might look like saying to your partner, I'm not okay and I need to talk, instead of disappearing into yourself and hoping they notice. It might look like eating lunch, actually sitting down and eating lunch, away from the desk, without the phone. It might look like calling your doctor, the appointment you've been putting off for 8 months, because if you go, it becomes real. None of those things look brave from the outside. From the outside, they look like ordinary life. But you and I both know the weight behind some of those ordinary things. We know what it costs to do the small thing that your fear has been loudly arguing against for months. That cost is real, that effort is real, and it deserves to be called what it is. There's a Japanese art form called kintsugi. I mention it sometimes with clients, and I have a small bowl in my office that demonstrates it. The practice is this. When a ceramic bowl breaks, instead of throwing it away or hiding the cracks, you repair it with gold. The break becomes part of the object. The damage becomes part of the beauty. The philosophy behind it is that the history of something, including its fractures, is what makes it valuable, not despite the breaks, but because of them. I think about this a lot when I look at my own life. The physicist who fell apart, the woman who asked for help at 22 and meant it, the mother who stopped lying in a minivan on a gray Tuesday morning, the therapist who sits across from people in their darkest moments and doesn't flinch, not because she's fearless, but because she's already been to that darkness and knows it has a floor. Every one of those breaks, every one of those cracks, repaired, imperfectly, with whatever I had. And the brave thing, the small, repeated, daily brave thing, was not any single moment. It was the ongoing choice to keep repairing instead of staying broken, to keep being honest instead of staying behind the armor.
Not in grand gestures, in the quiet morning decisions that nobody else sees. You're doing that too, whether you recognize it or not. Come back with me to that minivan. The rain on the windshield, the spilled milk, my son's voice. "Mom, are you happy?" That morning, I did not do anything impressive. I didn't give a speech, I didn't make a plan, I didn't have a breakthrough that fixed everything. I just stopped performing for 30 seconds. I let the truth sit in the car with us. And then a small hand touched my shoulder, and my 7-year-old said, "It's okay, Mommy, you can be sad." Permission, from the smallest possible source.
And from that moment, that tiny, rained-on, juice-boxed moment, I began the slow work of actually changing my life. That's what I want you to take with you today. Not a strategy, not a plan, just this. The bravest thing isn't always the biggest thing. Sometimes it's the text you send when you're struggling, the appointment you make, the conversation you start, the night you go to bed instead of pouring the drink, the morning you tell your truth instead of performing okay. Small, unglamorous, real. And it counts. It counts so much more than we give it credit for. If something in today's conversation touched something real for you, would you do something for me? Leave a comment. Tell me what your small, brave thing is right now. Not the supernova, the quiet thing, the one you've been doing that nobody's applauding.
I want to know, and someone else watching this needs to know they're not alone in doing it too. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their small things matter. Like the video if it helped, and subscribe if you haven't, because these conversations are the whole point of why I'm here. Take care of yourself this week, and I mean that. Really, the small ways too.